I caught him in our bed with my cousin. They laughed in my face, told me to knock next time, then he threw a pillow and snapped. Maybe if you were better in bed, I wouldn't be bored. They'd opened credit cards in my name, spent 19K, and let her move in to heal. Then blocked me like I was crazy, until I hired a lawyer and found what they forgot to erase. When I walked into my own bedroom and saw my boyfriend Evan in bed with my cousin Marissa, it felt like my body stopped working. Like someone had unplugged me from myself. They both froze for half a second, then laughed. Marissa had the nerve to pull the sheet up, pretending to be shy, and Evan just smirked. "You should have knocked," he said, tossing a pillow at me like it was some joke. Then, with that same lazy grin, he added, "Maybe if you were better in bed, I wouldn't be bored." I remember just staring at him, my hands shaking, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might split my ribs. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I just turned around and walked out. I could hear them laughing behind me. For a week, I tried to make sense of it. I replayed everything, how Marissa had temporarily moved into our guest room a few months ago, after her breakup. How Evan had told me to go easy on her, because she was fragile. How my credit card company had called about a new card I didn't remember opening. At first, I thought maybe I was going crazy. Maybe I had forgotten, maybe it was some mix-up. But then I got another call, this time about a store credit line at Best Buy. In my name, with my address. When I confronted Marissa, she rolled her eyes and told me I was too sensitive and probably mismanaging my money again. Evan chimed in with, "You're always overreacting." That's when I knew something was very wrong. They moved out the next week together and blocked me on everything. My cousin, my boyfriend of 4 years, both pretending like I was the problem. I was left with a trashed apartment, missing electronics, and over $19,000 in debt I didn't even know existed. But they made one mistake. One small, stupid, arrogant mistake that I didn't notice until I sat down with a lawyer and started going through the paperwork. It wasn't the signatures, those were forged well enough. It wasn't the fake email account they made under my name. It wasn't even the security questions they'd guessed right. It was something much simpler. Something that would make all their smug confidence crumble in a way they'd never see coming. And when I found it, I remember whispering to myself, "Got you!" Because they thought they'd destroyed me, but they forgot one thing. One very small thing that would ruin everything for them. Evan and I had been together for 4 years. We met at a music festival in Austin, sweaty, loud, chaotic. He spilled beer on my shoes, apologized, and somehow, by the end of the night, we were watching the sunrise from the hood of his old Toyota. He was charming back then. Not the cruel kind of charming, the disarming kind. He'd look at you like he saw something deeper, like he understood. I was 24, naive, working at a small marketing agency, trying to make rent. He was a bartender with dreams of starting his own business. I believed every word. The first couple of years were good: movie nights, road trips, lazy Sundays. My mom even liked him, which was rare. Then slowly, things shifted. He started criticizing how I dressed, how I talked too much at parties, how my friends were a bad influence. Little comments that felt like jokes until they didn't anymore. When I got promoted at work, he didn't congratulate me, he just said, "Must be nice to have everything handed to you." I should have seen it then, but I kept making excuses. Love does that, it turns red flags into misunderstandings. Then there was Marissa, my cousin. We weren't super close growing up, but family's family. She was the pretty one, the one who could get anyone to do anything with just a smile. She'd bounce from job to job, guy to guy, city to city. My mom always said she was just lost. When she showed up crying one night, saying her boyfriend had cheated on her and she had nowhere to go, I didn't even think twice. I offered her the guest room. Evan was the one who said, "Sure, let her crash here a bit. She seems like she needs a break." At first, it was fine. She cooked, cleaned, joked around. But then she started wearing my clothes, borrowing my perfume, sitting too close to Evan on the couch. Once, I came home and found her using my laptop. She said she was just checking email, but when I looked later, my browser history was wiped. Another time, I caught her answering a call meant for me, a bank call. I brushed it off. Told myself she was just careless. Told myself family doesn't do that. The night before I caught them, Evan had been distant, glued to his phone. Marissa had stayed home from work, claiming she felt sick. I kissed Evan goodbye that morning, went to a meeting, and came home early because I'd left my laptop charger. That's when I saw them. That's when everything I'd ignored, every tiny gut feeling, every off moment, slammed into me all at once. But it wasn't until I went through the credit card statements that the betrayal became real. Because their names were all over them. Not directly, but in the purchase patterns. Stores only Marissa shopped at. Subscriptions only Evan used. And when my lawyer told me what we could trace back to them, I realized just how deep they'd gone. But before I get to that, you need to know what they overlooked. Because that tiny mistake, the one thing they forgot to cover up, would become the exact weapon I needed. When my lawyer, Megan, spread the papers across her desk, I felt like I was staring at my own financial obituary. 6 accounts, all opened within a 4-month window. Every single one tied to my name, my social security number, my address. Total balance, $19,274.36. They'd been patient. Calculated. Each new line opened just weeks apart, never large enough to trigger fraud alerts. Most of the purchases were small at first, Target runs, Uber Eats, gas stations. Then they got bolder. TVs, designer sneakers. A weekend Airbnb in Houston, all of it under my name. Megan was calm, methodical. They were using your credit to build their lifestyle, she said, flipping through statements. The good news is it's provable fraud. But it'll take time. That's when she pointed at something odd. On one of the credit applications, there was a digital signature, supposedly mine. And the email they used wasn't my usual one, it was a slightly misspelled version. 1 letter off. They made a fake email, I said slowly. Like mine, but with an extra N, Megan nodded. And the IP address attached to that application, it traces back to your home Wi-Fi. My chest went tight. I stared at the page, remembering how Marissa had spent hours in the living room, typing away on her laptop, updating her resume. Remembering how Evan had set up our Wi-Fi when we first moved in, meaning he had the admin password. They weren't just careless, they were confident. Over the next week, I started connecting dots I didn't want to see. The missing electronics, pawned, the expensive liquor bottles Evan suddenly had, bought with my Best Buy card. Even the trip they took, to clear their heads, right after moving out, charged to my Capital One account. I started keeping a journal, notes, dates, screenshots, everything. Megan called it documenting the pattern. I called it fuel. Then something strange happened. One of the accounts sent a promotional email to my real inbox. A welcome bonus notification for a line of credit opened under my name, but using Marissa's phone number as the recovery contact. That was it. The crack in their armor. Because when you open a line of credit under someone else's name, you can't use your own number unless you're stupid. Or you forget the person you're impersonating still gets system alerts. It was like a breadcrumb trail, a digital fingerprint leading straight to them. I forwarded everything to Megan. She said, "This is enough to file both civil and criminal complaints." But something in me wasn't satisfied. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about humiliation, the laughter, the pillow, the way they made me feel like I was crazy for even asking questions. That's when the anger turned sharp, focused. I stopped crying. I started planning. And when I checked Marissa's Instagram a few nights later, a public post I wasn't supposed to see, I realized they'd just bought a used Jeep together. Paid for in cash. From the exact account Evan used to deposit our tax refund. My tax refund. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to make sure they lost everything they'd stolen, publicly, painfully, and permanently. I just needed one more piece of proof. I didn't even mean to find it. I swear. It started when Megan asked if I still had access to any of Evan's old devices. I remembered his old MacBook, the one he said crashed a few months before they left. He'd tossed it in the hall closet, said it was too slow to bother fixing. I pulled it out, charged it, and after a few failed password guesses, I tried the stupid one he used for everything. Rebel Evan 91. It worked. The desktop looked normal at first, folders named receipts, bills, photos. But inside photos, there was another folder hidden in the corner. It was labeled Marin, 1 letter off from my name, as if he'd done it to mock me. I clicked. Inside were hundreds of screenshots, PDF statements, and photos of my driver's license, social security card, and even my signature on old leases. It hit me then. They hadn't just used my info to open accounts. They'd built an entire identity around me. But the real gut punch came when I opened a file named the Plan PDF. It wasn't a joke. It was a typed document, pages long, dated 3 months before I caught them in bed. The first line said, "Goal, secure credit, cash out before Marin realizes and move to Texas for fresh start." It had bullet points, lists of what they'd need to do, fake job applications in my name, temporary P.O. boxes, and even steps on how to trigger emotional instability so she stops checking her mail. And below that, written in Marissa's handwriting, scanned in, was this: "She's so easy to gaslight, just act sorry and she'll blame herself." I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb. They planned it, every single piece of it. The manipulation, the debt, the breakup, even the timing. Scrolling down, I found a section labeled Exit Strategy. It mentioned that once the accounts maxed out, Evan would file for bankruptcy under emotional distress, while Marissa would distance for credibility and later reconnect if needed. It ended with a final note: "She'll recover, she always does, just slower than most." That line broke something in me I didn't know could break. I sat there shaking, staring at their words, realizing the betrayal wasn't about sex or money anymore, it was about control. They'd turned my life into a blueprint for their escape. But buried in that same folder was the thing they forgot, the one that would end them. There was a photo of Marissa holding my driver's license next to her face, like a selfie. The timestamp showed the exact date and time she used it for one of the fraudulent applications. That one picture was a legal death sentence. It proved intent. It proved impersonation. It proved everything. I sent it to Megan immediately. She didn't even hesitate. "This isn't just fraud," she said. "It's felony identity theft." That night, I poured myself a drink, stared at my reflection, and whispered, "Okay, you wanted war. You've got it." Because they thought they'd left me broken. But they'd actually handed me the weapon that would burn their perfect little plan to ash. After I found the Plan PDF and the selfie with my license, nothing felt messy or chaotic anymore. It felt precise. Like a chessboard rearranged into something I could actually control. Megan told me we were sitting on an ironclad case, and if I wanted them to feel it properly, we had to play by the rules. So I did. I learned to weaponize paperwork and patience. First thing I did was freeze. Not emotionally, I stayed furious, but financially and administratively. I called the credit bureaus and put a fraud alert on my file. I closed accounts that I could, changed every password, switched emails, and set up two-factor authentication that they couldn't guess. I made my world boring and locked. That felt good. Like locking the door after a home invader. Megan filed the police report for identity theft and helped me compile the evidence packet. Bank statements, the IP logs tying the fake email to our home Wi-Fi, the Plan PDF, the driver's license selfie with its timestamp. We subpoenaed Evan's old phone records and emails. The judge signed it. That felt cinematic in a way I didn't expect, papers stamping, the prosecutor's assistant looking at our folder and saying, "This is more than we usually get." We also sent certified letters to every creditor, demanding fraud investigations and refusing the debt. I learned the language of finance, chargebacks, good faith disputes, provisional credits. I sat across from Megan in a tiny conference room and watched her call Capital One and the bank that had opened the store card, reading out sections of the file like an accusation. Everything they'd used against me, we used back at them. But legal moves only do so much to a living, breathing liar who thinks social capital will save them. So I started picking at the social fabric they'd relied on. I made one careful, irreversible decision. I didn't rage post. I didn't scream at them on social media. I built a controlled narrative. I wrote a single, factual letter, short, calm, addressed to both of their workplaces, and attached a redacted copy of the police report and the driver's license photo. I wasn't trying to humiliate. I was doing the thing they'd hoped I wouldn't, giving employers the facts so they could act. If they'd built lives on lies, those lives could unravel legally and professionally without me becoming the spectacle. I contacted my mom and a few family members with the evidence because I wanted the truth anchored with the people who mattered. My mom cried and then asked what she could do. She showed up at my house with a box of my things and a casserole. That steadied me more than I thought it would. Then I did the quiet, petty thing that made me feel like myself again. I reclaimed physical space. I changed the locks. I hired a locksmith, walked through the empty guest room one last time and closed the door for good. It was symbolic and it stung, but it felt like taking a breath. There were small wins. Creditors reversed charges. A detective called to say they'd opened a criminal probe after seeing the timestamped selfie. A bank froze the suspicious accounts. Each victory was slow but real, like watching paint dry on a wall you'd thought would fall. And yet, even with the legal machinery working, my anger wanted spectacle. I wanted them to feel the exposure exactly the way they dished it out, with humiliation and permanence. Megan warned me about the line between justice and vengeance, and I listened. So I planned for consequences that were legal, surgical, and public in the right places. Evidence to prosecutors, facts to HR departments, truth to family. I wanted them fired, sued, and publicly stripped of the lies they'd used as armor, not harassed or harmed. When I laid out the strategy with Megan that night, she added one more weapon I hadn't considered: cross-examination. If their lies were rehearsed, they would crumble under sworn questioning. If they bragged in texts, we'd have them on record. If they laughed in bed at my face, the court would not. They had underestimated one thing: that I would be methodical, patient, and ruthless in the way the law allows. They'd left a trail. I was going to follow it, until everything they built on my identity had nowhere left to hide. What blew my head apart wasn't a single new piece of evidence. It was the volume of proof, like a chorus of other women suddenly singing the same terrible song. I thought I was up against two selfish people with an inflated sense of entitlement. I was wrong. They were playing a role in a pattern, and I was not the first audience. A week after filing the criminal complaint, my inbox got a message from an unknown address. "Saw the news. You're not alone." It was short, and attached was a screenshot of a post from a neighborhood forum with a woman's selfie holding a driver's license, the same make as mine, and a caption about someone opening store credit in her name. The woman's name was different. The photo date was 6 months earlier. The face in the selfie looked like Marissa smiling at the camera, except in that picture she had a different haircut and a barista apron on. At first I froze. I forwarded it to Megan. She tasted the air and said, "Open any contact the woman sent. Ask. Don't assume." So I wrote terse, factual, and the woman wrote back in paragraphs, all caps in places, and then sent screenshots. A list of suspicious purchases, a text from a man named Evan asking for help with a friend, and a blurry photo of a Jeep with a license plate that matched the registration number on the title Marissa had used when she sold me some jewelry last year. The Jeep was the same one I'd seen on Marissa's Instagram. That was the moment the case stopped being about my humiliation and became about pattern and predation. Megan ran the new screenshots against our subpoenas and found overlaps. The same email variants, the same PO box rented under a fake name, the same messaging style. The Rebel Evan 91 password was in at least 3 devices tied to other victims. The IP addresses created a spiderweb that centered on one hotspot: the pair's old apartment, the place Evan and Marissa had used as a staging ground. Then a detective called me with something she'd found in public records: a string of short-term leases, 1-month stays under different names, each followed by a flurry of credit applications at stores in different states. "They moved, they pillaged, they moved again," she said. Listening to her speak that way made my stomach drop colder than any courtroom would. I started getting messages from strangers, women in different cities who'd been ghosted by a friend who moved in together, who borrowed ID for rent, or who suddenly found debt in their names. Their voices were raw and wide-eyed and exhausted. One of them had even kept voicemails where Marissa called, crying, begging for help after a breakup, and in the background you could hear Evan's laugh. Another sent me a tax transcript that showed a refund deposited to a bank account with Evan's name, the same account that had earlier shown activity tied to my refund. The threads kept looping back. It was a second kind of betrayal, the realization that I'd been a small part of a larger cruelty, and that cruelty was methodical. This wasn't a one-off affair and a dumb identity theft. This was a business model. Manipulate trust, get close, harvest identity, cash out, disappear. They'd practiced it until they were slick. The emotional shift was strange. For a while, I'd wanted the brutal, theatrical revenge where they'd feel tiny in front of everyone. Now I wanted them cataloged and stopped, not just punished for what they'd done to me, but stripped of the mechanism that let them do it to others. I wanted their paper trail exposed in the exact places where they'd hidden, across banks, leasing offices, and human resources departments. Megan agreed. She widened the subpoenas. The detective coordinated with 2 other jurisdictions. The police in one city reopened a cold case when the plate on that Jeep matched a repossession record. Each little legal dig pulled another ugly secret out of the ground. But the pattern also fed a darker suspicion. Why us? Why cousins, girlfriends, roommates, people easy to enter under the pretense of family or care? Why did they always pick someone who would offer the guest room? The answer would come later, more chilling than I could have imagined. But in that second before the reason arrived, all I felt was a white-hot clarity. This wasn't personal alone. It was systemic. They weren't messy lovers. They were predators who learned how to make people small and quiet. I printed the new files and stacked them on the table like ammunition. The room smelled like old paper and coffee. I was no longer only angry. I was hungry for the peace that would break them for good. When the detective slid the manila envelope across the table, I thought it would be more receipts, more proof. Instead, it was a spreadsheet printed on thin paper, columns and columns of names, dates, and shorthand I couldn't parse at first. At the top, in Evan's blocky handwriting, it said, "Targets ROI." I remember laughing once, half a bark, because laughter is easier than the hollow that followed. Then I read it. They'd ranked people. Not by charm or by closeness, by credit score, employment stability, and whether the person had a parent with a good landline number. There were codes: G for good credit, L for landlord info on file, H for high refund expected. My name was circled with a note: steady, promotable. Marissa had written next to it in quick pencil, easy to isolate guest room rent. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't a petty flirtation gone wrong. It was arithmetic. They treated our lives like spreadsheets because that's what they were to them, data sets to be exploited. When I called them in the interrogation room, they didn't sob. They didn't beg. Evan shrugged like he'd been asked about the weather and said, "We had bills, Marin. People don't understand how expensive it is to start over." He sounded bored. He sounded rehearsed. Marissa smiled the way someone might smile before explaining a tax return. Later, the detective handed me another file. Messages between Evan and a man listed in a car repossession notice. The messages didn't read like small talk. They read like logistics. "Got the lease," one said. 2 weeks on the refund. Move the Jeep by Friday. There were timestamps and codes, and one line that cut through me like ice. "Keep it clean. No stabbing, no drama, numbers only." The reason they'd done it, the cold, bright reason, was simple and vile. They wanted money. Not just quick cash, not just the thrill of deception. They wanted an engine that could be scaled. A system of trust exploitation that fed them steady cash, financed cars, short-term leases, a lifestyle built on other people's lives. They practiced it, refined it, taught each other how to gaslight a mother into mailing a replacement ID, how to set up burner emails that looked real. They turned relationships into supply chains. There was more. In one audio file a coworker turned over, Marissa laughed about who would miss a cousin, while Evan walked her through forging a signature. In a voicemail from a previous target, you could hear Marissa's voice cracking with false sobs while Evan, in the background, coached her on cadence to make it believable. This wasn't opportunism. This was craft. They'd trained each other, honed scripts, and treated empathy like a tool. But the most chilling line came from Evan in a private text to a friend. If they can't protect their credit, they don't deserve to own it. Not a justification, not even a rationalization, a philosophy. A calculus that turned entire human beings into liabilities to be neutralized. Reading all of that, the dread settled deep and steady. I wasn't just furious anymore. I was furious with how quiet and practiced the cruelty was, how they'd normalized erasure. They didn't view us as people who could be hurt. They viewed us as resources to extract. That realization changed the shape of the anger inside me. It was clinical now, exact. I folded the papers back into the envelope and thought about the way they'd laughed when I walked in. About the pillow. About the smugness that assumed I'd never find the threads and pull. They'd built a machine that banked on people being too stunned to fight. They were about to learn what happens when someone refuses to be treated like inventory. It started with the hearing. Small courtroom, stale coffee smell, fluorescent lights that made everything feel exposed. Evan and Marissa sat across the aisle in second-hand suits. For the first time since that day in my bedroom, they looked small, not smug, just tired and cornered. Megan handled the legal choreography, steady and calm. When she displayed the plan PDF on the projector, I watched the color drain from their faces. The driver's license selfie, the spreadsheet labeled targets ROI, the email logs that traced to our home Wi-Fi, every piece of arrogance printed and numbered. The judge's voice was low and dry. Identity theft, fraud, false application for credit. Total damages, $19,274.36. Then the line that landed harder than I expected. Restitution ordered, felony convictions entered. It wasn't applause that followed, just the shuffle of paper and the sound of two people realizing that a future had just been locked out of reach. But the legal part was only the first layer. What came next was quieter, deeper, the way truth travels once it's official. HR departments received verification requests and fired them. Banks sent notices freezing their accounts. Marissa's new employer got a court order to garnish wages for restitution. Evan's car, the Jeep, was repossessed within a week. I didn't post, didn't gloat. I just watched the machine they'd built collapse under its own paperwork. Every time I thought about their laughter, I remembered the sound of the bailiff calling their names. The other victims were the real closure. The detective connected us, carefully, through victim liaison channels. We formed a small online group, 6 women in 3 states, all of us who'd been played by the same 2 faces. We swapped documentation, shared updates on credit repairs, and slowly rebuilt. One woman got her identity cleared after 2 years. Another finally had her credit restored enough to get a loan for grad school. For me, closure wasn't a movie ending. It was a call from my bank confirming my record was clean. It was the moment my credit score ticked back up, and I realized that their names would now follow every background check they ever faced. Permanent ink. A few months later, I walked through my apartment, and the space felt different. Not haunted, not fragile, just mine again. The air didn't hum with tension. I'd replaced the bed, repainted the walls, and left the guest room empty. I liked it that way. Sometimes people ask if I ever wanted to confront them again, face to face. I don't. Watching them in court was enough. You can't reason with people who see empathy as a tool. The best punishment was stripping away the leverage they'd built on other people's trust, making them live in a world where their own names carry the weight of what they did. I think about that last line in their plan, she'll recover. She always does. They were right about one thing. I did, just not the way they meant. Because recovery isn't forgiving. It's rebuilding with proof. It's the quiet revenge of living debt-free and unafraid, while they can't rent an apartment without explaining their crimes. When I finally got my new driver's license, I held it up, looked at the clean plastic, and smiled. "Recovered," I whispered. Then I tucked it into my wallet under my own name and locked the door behind me.